In the depths of the wild, a powerful force roams, silent, watchful, and unpredictable. Though often avoiding human contact, grizzly bears can become dangerously aggressive when startled or threatened. Their attacks unfold in a terrifying blur of strength and instinct, leaving little time to react. These rare yet violent encounters are chilling reminders of nature's raw dominance. Every grizzly charge is a primal moment where survival instincts collide, both human and beast. Understanding these attacks is acknowledging the delicate balance between awe and fear in the presence of true wilderness. In the autumn of 1985, deep within the remote wilderness of the Alaskan interior, near the small settlement of McGrath, the dense forests and sprawling tundra were home to various wildlife, including the formidable grizzly bear. The region, characterized by its vast, unspoiled landscapes and harsh climatic conditions, had increased bear activity that year, attributed to a scarcity of natural food sources. Ezekiel "Zeke" McAllister, a seasoned trapper known for his deep understanding of the Alaskan wilderness, had built a modest cabin along the Kuskokwim River. The cabin, constructed from local timber and insulated against the biting cold, served as his home and base for trapping expeditions. Zeke was well acquainted with the rhythms of the land and the creatures that inhabited it. In late September, Zeke began noticing signs of a grizzly bear frequenting the vicinity of his cabin. Large paw prints in the mud, overturned logs, and remnants of scavenged food indicated the bear's presence. Initially, Zeke took standard precautions, securing his food supplies, ensuring his cabin was fortified, and maintaining a vigilant watch during outdoor activities. However, the bear's behavior grew increasingly audacious. It approached the cabin during nighttime, scratching at the walls and rummaging through Zeke's storage shed. The bear's proximity and boldness were alarming, suggesting a heightened level of aggression possibly spurred by hunger. One crisp morning, as the first light of dawn filtered through the dense canopy, Zeke ventured outside to gather firewood. The air was filled with the earthy scent of damp foliage, and the distant call of a raven echoed through the trees. As he bent to pick up a log, a sudden rustling in the underbrush snapped his attention to the edge of the clearing. Emerging from the shadows was the grizzly, its massive frame silhouetted against the morning mist. The bear's eyes locked onto Zeke, and without hesitation, it charged, covering the distance between them with alarming speed. The ground seemed to tremble under the weight of the approaching beast. Years of experience kicked in as Zeke sprang into action. He sprinted towards his cabin, the adrenaline surging through his veins, amplifying his senses. Reaching the porch, he grabbed his trusted .338 Winchester Magnum rifle, a firearm he kept loaded and ready for such dire situations. The rifle, known for its stopping power, had been Zeke's companion on many hunts. Turning to face the oncoming bear, Zeke steadied his breathing, focusing intently on his target. The grizzly was mere yards away, its powerful muscles propelling it forward with lethal intent. With a calm born from years of facing the unpredictable dangers of the wild, Zeke aimed for the bear's skull and squeezed the trigger. The shot rang out, a thunderous crack that echoed through the forest. The bullet found its mark, penetrating the bear's thick skull and delivering a fatal blow. The massive creature collapsed mid-stride, its momentum carrying it a few more feet before it lay motionless on the forest floor. In the aftermath, Zeke approached the fallen bear cautiously, ensuring it posed no further threat. The reality of the encounter settled over him, a mix of relief and the sobering acknowledgement of the fragility of life in the wilderness. Wildlife authorities, upon being notified, arrived to assess the situation. They confirmed that the bear's aggressive behavior was likely a result of the food shortages that had plagued the region that year. The incident served as a stark reminder to the local community of the unpredictable nature of wildlife and the importance of preparedness. In response, local authorities initiated a series of community meetings to educate residents about bear behavior, safety measures, and the responsible use of firearms in self-defense situations. Zeke's encounter became a focal point in these discussions, underscoring the delicate balance between humans and wildlife in the Alaskan wilderness. The event left an indelible mark on Zeke. While he had always respected the creatures of the forest, this encounter deepened his understanding of the thin line between coexistence and conflict. Ever vigilant, he continued his life in the wilderness and advocated for responsible wildlife management and education in his community. In the weeks following the incident, Zeke reflected more frequently on the fragility of survival in the Alaskan backcountry. He began documenting his experiences in a leather-bound journal, recounting not just the attack, but his years of close calls, lessons learned, and his evolving relationship with the environment. He hoped it would help others who chose a life so far removed from society. Word of Zeke's encounter spread slowly beyond McGrath, eventually picked up by a regional wildlife magazine. The story of a lone trapper defending his home with a single perfectly placed shot captured readers' imaginations. Yet Zeke remained humble, turning down interviews and maintaining that he was no hero, just someone who happened to be prepared when the forest threw its worst at him. Over time, a few curious travelers and aspiring trappers made the journey to meet him, hoping to learn firsthand from a man who had faced down a charging grizzly. Zeke would host them for a night or two, sharing stories by firelight but never glamorizing the dangers. He insisted they understand that wilderness wasn't a place to prove oneself. It was a place to respect, observe, and navigate with humility. Years later, a small wooden sign was erected near the path leading to Zeke's cabin. It simply read, "McAllister Point. Respect the wild." It was placed there by one of the young men Zeke had mentored, who would go on to become a ranger in a national park in the central area of the Alaska Range. The sign stood not as a tribute to violence or heroism, but as a quiet reminder of the fragile coexistence between humans and the wild, a lesson Zeke McAllister had learned, lived, and passed on. An unprecedented wildlife incident shook the local community in the early hours of October 3, 1996, on the rugged and sparsely inhabited Kunashir Island in the Russian Far East. Kunashir, the southernmost of the Kuril Islands, is known for its seismic activity, natural hot springs, and volatile weather, dense forests, steep volcanic slopes, and a diverse wildlife population, including Russian grizzly bears occasionally wandering from neighboring Sakhalin, make the island breathtaking and treacherous. Yegor Kalashnik, a 42-year-old senior officer at the Yuzhno-Kurilsk police station, had spent nearly 2 decades serving on the island. The station, a squat concrete building surrounded by a wire mesh fence, stood near the town's edge, where human development faded into thick, untamed forest. Kalashnik and his fellow officers conducted routine patrol shifts on the night in question. There had been reports of livestock going missing from nearby farms, likely scavenged by bears struggling to find food as the harsh Siberian winter approached. At about 3:17 a.m., Officer Denis Malenkov stepped outside the station's main gate for a smoke break. Another officer, Ilya Solomin, accompanied him. Midway through their shift, the two men spoke briefly about the coming snow. Neither noticed the rustling in the shadows beyond the fence. Then, without warning, the steel gate swung open. A massive Russian grizzly bear, emaciated but still terrifying in size and strength, barreled through the entrance, its breath visible in the icy night air. The attack was sudden, brutal, and completely unexpected. Caught off guard, both officers had no time to react. Malenkov was knocked to the ground immediately, the bear's claws raking across his back and shoulder. Solomon tried to run but was grabbed by the animal before reaching the door. Kalashnik and 2 other officers heard the commotion inside the station and rushed to the windows. They watched, horrified, as the bear mauled their colleagues just yards away. Kalashnik ordered the station locked down and called for emergency backup from the military outpost 15 kilometers away. Armed only with sidearms, the officers inside chose not to engage the bear directly through the glass, fearing that a failed shot might draw the beast further inside. The bear thrashed and roared for nearly 5 minutes before suddenly retreating into the dark forest as swiftly as it had come. Malenkov and Solomon were still alive when the officers rushed out moments later. Both were bleeding heavily and in shock. A military medical unit arrived shortly after, transporting the men by armored vehicle to the regional hospital. Solomon's injuries were extensive, and he was placed in intensive care. Malenkov, though in severe pain, was expected to recover after several surgeries. Local authorities quickly set up perimeter patrols and wildlife monitoring in the surrounding areas. Wildlife experts were flown in to assess the situation. They determined the Russian grizzly was likely an older male forced south from its natural range by increasingly scarce food supplies. An unseasonably warm September had disrupted the usual berry and salmon runs, and the bear's desperation had overridden its usual wariness of humans. The incident prompted a sweeping change in wildlife management protocols across the Kuril Islands. Previously, ALAC's patrols were replaced with round-the-clock forest surveillance, and officers were outfitted with higher-caliber weapons capable of neutralizing large predators. Citizens were issued guidelines on how to bear-proof their homes and farms. Yegor Kalashnik, haunted by what he had witnessed, later requested a transfer off the island. He gave a rare interview to a regional newspaper, emphasizing that the bear was not evil, just hungry, pushed too far by a collapsing ecosystem. Solomon, after multiple surgeries, eventually returned to light duty and became a vocal advocate for improving cohabitation strategies between humans and wildlife in Russia's remote territories. A small monument carved from driftwood and stone stands outside the police station. It bears the names of the two officers and a simple engraving, "Survival through vigilance." The bear was never found, despite multiple search efforts. Some islanders believe it retreated to the northern cliffs and died from injuries or starvation. Others still claim to hear it in the forests on stormy nights. Years later, a documentary crew from Vladivostok visited Kunashir to film a segment on the incident. Locals shared tales of increased animal aggression over the years and voiced concerns about the warming climate's impact on native species. Though not widely broadcast, the documentary found a niche audience online, and the story of the Kunashir police station bear attack became an eerie reminder of nature's unpredictability and the high cost of human encroachment. Despite the trauma, the incident sparked important discussions on local and federal levels about adapting infrastructure and public safety procedures to an evolving wilderness. It served as a case study for law enforcement agencies across remote parts of Russia, highlighting that threats on the frontier weren't just human in origin. For those who served in Yuzhno-Kurilsk that night, it was a lesson permanently etched into memory. Survival depended not just on courage, but on preparation, restraint, and deep respect for the forces lurking just beyond the light. In the years following the incident, Yuzhno-Kurilsk took further steps to fortify its border with the wild. Surveillance drones were introduced to patrol the dense forest perimeter during the colder months, when bear incursions were most likely. A new wilderness ranger post was also established nearby, with biologists and trained wildlife officers equipped to respond swiftly to predator sightings. The station was named after Solomon, whose ordeal had inspired renewed commitment to coexistence. Meanwhile, schools across Kunashir introduced student wildlife safety drills, simulating scenarios involving bear encounters and evacuation procedures. Posters illustrating safe behaviors were plastered in classrooms, and students were taught how to use bear spray and emergency whistles. The culture of preparedness that emerged not only reduced bear-related incidents, but fostered a unique respect among the island's youth for the creatures that shared their land. By 2005, a local author named Natalia Vetrov published a non-fiction book titled Claw at the Gate, chronicling the events of that night and the systemic changes it prompted. The book received national recognition and was adapted into a radio drama. Through Vetrov's vivid storytelling and interviews with survivors, readers across Russia understood the fragility of the boundary between man and wilderness. She quoted Kalashnik's haunting final words in the epilogue before he departed from the island. "You don't fight the wild, you brace against it and hope it lets you live." In the summer of 2007, deep within the rugged wilderness of Kodiak Island, Alaska, a fatal bear encounter would go on to rattle the tightly knit local outdoor community. Kodiak Island, the second largest island in the United States, is renowned for its untamed beauty and massive namesake bear species, the Kodiak bear, a subspecies of the brown bear that ranks among the largest terrestrial carnivores on Earth. The island's thick spruce forests, steep river valleys, and isolated coastal inlets provide ideal habitat for these powerful animals, whose behavior can become dangerously unpredictable during food scarcity. That July, 33-year-old Dalton Mercer, an experienced backpacker from Eugene, Oregon, embarked on a solo trip across the southern range of Kodiak Island. Mercer had planned a 10-day trek following the Karluk River to fish for salmon and document wildlife for his blog. He'd once visited the island and was confident navigating its remote terrain. He planned to travel light, camping along the riverbanks and using a satellite phone to check in periodically with his brother back home. By the 5th day, Mercer set up camp near the mouth of a narrow river bend near Uyak Bay. The area was quiet, shaded by a dense wall of alder and spruce, with signs of bear activity visible in large prints in the mud and stripped bark. That night, Mercer cooked a small meal and, against standard wilderness protocol, left a portion of smoked salmon wrapped in foil near the water's edge. It was a careless mistake, likely due to fatigue after a long upstream hike. He noted in his journal that he'd seen no signs of active bear presence that day, only faint tracks. Roughly half a mile upriver, another 28-year-old Bryson Felt, a hiker, was also camping. Felt, a field botanist from Anchorage, was on a separate expedition cataloging alpine plant life. The two had crossed paths earlier in the week, exchanged a few words, and then gone their separate ways. Around 2:40 a.m., Felt was awoken by the sound of distressed yelling and a loud crashing through the underbrush. He grabbed his flashlight and bear spray and followed the noise toward the bend. What Felt came upon was chaos. Mercer's campsite had been torn apart. He spotted the massive adult male Kodiak bear dragging something into the river's shallows. As Felt inched closer through the trees, the beam of his flashlight illuminated Mercer's body. The bear pawed at him, trying to roll him into deeper water. Felt acted instinctively, shouting and deploying the bear spray from a safe distance. The bear recoiled momentarily and lumbered into the woods, leaving Mercer partially submerged, floating. Felt rushed into the river, pulled the injured man onto the bank, and attempted CPR. It was too late. Mercer had suffered fatal injuries during the initial attack. His upper torso bore deep lacerations, and his head had likely struck a rock during the struggle. Emergency responders later confirmed that Mercer had drowned, though blunt force trauma was also a contributing factor. Felt immediately used his satellite beacon to signal for emergency extraction, and within hours, a rescue helicopter transported both him and Mercer's body back to the town of Kodiak. The wildlife authorities launched an investigation, surveying the attack site and setting up trail cameras to track the bear. Biologists concluded that the bear had likely been drawn to the scent of the leftover salmon. With an early salmon run falling short that year, the region's bears were reportedly hungrier and more aggressive than usual. The bear involved in the attack was never definitively identified or captured, but local rangers temporarily closed several popular backcountry routes as a precaution. The news sent shockwaves through the outdoor community. Though Kodiak bears are powerful predators, fatal encounters with humans are rare, especially when proper precautions are taken. Dalton Mercer's death was the first fatal bear attack on Kodiak Island in over 2 decades. Wilderness guides, rangers, and locals reviewed and reinforced their safety protocols. Educational signs were updated at major trailheads, emphasizing food storage rules and the importance of bear-aware camping practices. Shaken by the experience, Felt returned to Anchorage and gave a detailed report to authorities. He later shared his account in a wilderness safety journal, hoping his story would help prevent future tragedies. He wrote that the guilt of being unable to save Mercer haunted him, though many praised his quick thinking and bravery. The state later recognized him for his courageous response. Mercer's family established a nonprofit called Trail Mind in his memory. The organization aims to educate solo hikers on best safety practices in bear country. It distributes free bear-proof food containers and provides online training modules for wilderness survival. Within 2 years, over 5,000 hikers had completed the program. The site of the attack remains unmarked, deep in the wilderness along the Karluk River, but it has become a cautionary waypoint for seasoned backpackers and bush pilots who know the story. It is a grim reminder that even the most skilled adventurers are vulnerable when the balance between human caution and wild instinct tips the wrong way. Despite the tragedy, Mercer's legacy continues in every traveler who takes one extra step to stay safe in bear country, and in every solo hiker who remembers to keep their food far from their tent. To this day, the memory of Dalton Mercer lives on, not through fear, but through preparedness, a quiet legacy carved into the trails of Kodiak Island, where the wild is beautiful, brutal, and always watching. On the frost-laced morning of November 12, 2011, in a remote pocket of a national forest in Montana, a chilling encounter unfolded that would become one of the region's most talked-about wildlife incidents. Located near the small town of Big Sky, the forest stretches across vast tracts of pine-covered mountains and winding alpine roads, where cell phone service is unreliable and wildlife sightings are common. The area is known for its scenic isolation and its resident grizzly bears. Ernest Weller, a 51-year-old long-haul truck driver from Bozeman, had signed a contract to deliver construction supplies to a development site near Spanish Peaks. The mountain roads were slick with early snow, and the journey had taken longer than expected. After a tense night drive along winding back roads, Weller pulled into a gravel rest area just off Route 191 around 6:45 a.m., intending to stretch his legs and heat a thermos of coffee. The site, surrounded by dense evergreens and partially shielded from the road, felt tranquil, but carried a weight of eerie silence. Weller stepped out of the cab and left his engine running. The clank of his steel thermos echoed unnaturally in the cold air. He took a few steps toward the edge of the tree line to relieve himself, unaware that just beyond the thicket, a grizzly bear, drawn by the scent of food from previous truck stops, was already nearby. It had been foraging overnight, disturbed by shrinking food sources and encroaching development. The bear, a massive male estimated at 700 pounds, had been spotted weeks earlier by locals, but had so far evaded wildlife authorities. The attack was shockingly fast. As Weller zipped up and turned back toward his rig, the bear burst through the underbrush without a sound. It closed the distance in seconds and struck Weller with a violent swipe to the torso, sending him crashing into a patch of snow-covered shrubs. Disoriented and bleeding from deep lacerations, Weller scrambled to his feet and stumbled toward the truck. The bear, momentarily disoriented by the noise of the idling engine, hesitated just long enough for Weller to wrench open the truck door and throw himself inside. Bleeding and gasping for air, Weller slammed the door shut just as the bear slammed its weight into the side of the vehicle. The window cracked. The truck rocked under the bear's weight as it clawed at the side panel, trying to reach the man inside. Weller reached for his radio and frantically called for help. His voice, ragged with pain and fear, came from a dispatcher in Bozeman, who immediately alerted wildlife officers and emergency services. The bear continued pacing around the truck for another 5 minutes before retreating into the woods. Weller, clutching a blood-soaked towel to his side, remained conscious long enough for help to arrive roughly 40 minutes later. He was airlifted to a hospital in Bozeman with severe injuries to his rib cage, abdomen, and arms. Doctors later said the attack could have been fatal if the bear's claws had struck 2 inches higher. Wildlife authorities launched a full investigation, setting up trail cameras and traps in the surrounding area. Though tracks were found and several bears were tagged, the specific grizzly responsible for the attack was never conclusively identified. Locals speculated that it had moved further into the mountains, away from the increasing human activity. The attack prompted a new wave of safety protocols for delivery drivers and construction workers in wilderness-adjacent areas. Weller himself became an unlikely advocate for wildlife education, giving interviews and speaking to driver safety groups about his experience. He never returned to that stretch of forest, but kept the claw-scarred truck door in his garage as a reminder. Montana's wildlife authorities erected a small warning sign at the rest area. It read simply that this was bear country and advised people to keep doors closed and alert. The incident was also used in training sessions for wilderness first responders, becoming a textbook example of quick thinking and survival instinct. Though Ernest Weller's life was permanently altered, his survival stood as a testament to the razor-thin line between everyday routine and primal danger in America's remote landscapes. In the following years, the region saw an uptick in human-wildlife interactions, prompting the installation of bear-proof trash receptacles, stronger regulations on food storage for drivers, and seasonal patrols during hibernation transitions. Weller's case helped fast-track a state-funded program that equipped remote truck stops and rest areas with emergency communication gear, which was previously lacking in many rural zones. Once a reserved man focused only on meeting delivery deadlines, Ernest was regularly contacted by journalists, wildlife researchers, and curious adventurers who'd heard fragments of his tale. Though he declined most interviews, he agreed to a short documentary produced by a local film student. The film, Within Striking Distance, gained online traction and raised awareness about Montana's growing tension between industry and nature. Despite his injuries, Weller eventually returned to the road, though he stuck to interstate routes and avoided remote deliveries. In his later years, he moved to Billings and opened a modest diner with his sister. A framed photo of his old truck, claw marks and all, was hung near the register. He often told newcomers that they hadn't lived until they had outrun something that should have killed them. The attack also increased collaboration between Montana's Department of Transportation and local wildlife officials. Joint task forces began mapping high-risk corridors and flagging zones with heavy bear activity to inform drivers via digital signage and CB alerts. Rest stops across western Montana received emergency supply kits containing trauma packs, bear spray, and satellite beacons, a small but meaningful measure born out of Weller's brush with death. Weller's name became a shorthand among seasoned drivers, a quiet reference when discussing route safety or wilderness precautions. Pulling a Weller became trucker slang for narrowly dodging disaster in remote territory. Though the phrase was often used jokingly, it carried a weight of respect. Those who had driven the same snowy roads near Spanish Peaks usually left a thermos of hot coffee or a note on the rest area bench where the attack happened. A few scrawled lines became a kind of folklore. Drivers were advised to stay warm, sharp, and watch the trees. In 2018, nearly 7 years after the incident, Weller received a letter from a young trucker named Cody Bricks, who credited the man's story for saving his life. Bricks had been cornered by a black bear near Flathead Lake and remembered Weller's account, particularly his decision to leave the engine running and the cab unlocked. The letter, written in nervous but heartfelt handwriting, thanked Weller for being the reason he made it home. Ernest, touched by the message, had it framed and hung it next to the dented thermos he'd carried that day. Though he passed away quietly in 2023 from unrelated health issues, Weller's legacy endured. Now run by his niece, his diner kept the original signage and added a new menu item called the Grizzly Escape, a hearty breakfast sandwich with a kick of hot sauce and a side of caution. Visitors still came through, asking about the man who once ran from a bear and lived to tell the tale. Some just wanted to see the claw marks on that old truck door, still gleaming faintly under glass, a silent monument to the line between luck and instinct. A national park, nestled in the southern state of Karnataka, India, stretches over 870 square kilometers of dry, deciduous forest and open grasslands. Originally established as a hunting reserve for the Maharajas of Mysore, it became a protected national park in the 1970s under Project Tiger. Over the years, the park has gained a reputation for its tiger population, elephants, and a surprisingly aggressive resident, the sloth bear. Despite its misleading name and awkward gait, the sloth bear is known for its unpredictable nature and powerful claws, capable of inflicting serious injuries if provoked. In 2014, a small group of foreign tourists visited the national park as part of a photo safari expedition arranged by a mid-tier travel agency based out of Bangalore. The safari group was led by Sandeep Murthy, a local guide with over 15 years of experience in wildlife tourism. Among the tourists was 33-year-old Anton Dietrich, a graphic designer from Dresden, Germany, known to his friends for his obsession with photographing dangerous wildlife. His travel companions included a retired couple from Brisbane and a documentary student from the UK, none of whom were particularly seasoned in jungle outings. The incident occurred late in October, during the second safari ride of the day. The Jeep had already sighted a herd of spotted deer and a lone tusker from a distance. Sandeep motioned for the driver to slow down as they navigated a narrow trail, flanked by lantana thickets and dry bamboo. A large sloth bear was visible just off the path, sniffing and pawing through the dry underbrush, likely searching for termites or wild fruit. Though bears were common in the park, getting a sighting during the daytime was considered rare. The group leaned forward in their seats, cameras ready, as the Jeep rolled to a stop about 15 meters away. According to Sandeep's later account, he had advised the group to remain still and quiet. But in his eagerness to get a clearer view for the tourists, he had the driver edge the Jeep a few meters closer, an error in judgment. The bear froze. It turned its head toward them, nose twitching in agitation. Its small, beady eyes locked onto the Jeep. Sandeep recognized the body language immediately. The stiffened limbs, lowered head, and puffed-out coat were all signs of a defensive bear. Before he could instruct the driver to reverse, the bear let out a guttural roar and charged the vehicle. The initial swipe hit the Jeep's left side, rocking it slightly. The claws raked across the metal door with a shriek of tearing paint. Passengers screamed and ducked. In the chaos, Anton, seated in the middle row, attempted to open his door slightly to stick out his DSLR lens for a better shot. It was a catastrophic decision. The moment the door cracked open, the bear reared up and struck out with one massive paw, its claws hooking into the narrow gap. The blow smashed against Anton's arm and shoulder before the guide could slam the Jeep into reverse. The vehicle lurched backward, wheels spinning in the loose soil. The bear followed briefly, but soon lost interest, lumbering back into the underbrush with a few huffs. Sandeep kept driving until they were several hundred meters away and back on a wider trail, before stopping to assess the situation. Anton was cradling his arm, which had a deep gash and visible bruising along the shoulder and collarbone. Blood soaked his sleeve, and he appeared to be in shock. The guide radioed for help, and they returned to the park entrance where an ambulance transported Anton to a hospital in Mysore, about 2 hours away. He required stitches and was kept overnight for observation due to minor fractures. Fortunately, his injuries weren't life-threatening. Forest officials were quick to investigate the incident. According to them, sloth bears in the area had shown increasingly aggressive behavior over the years, likely due to habitat pressure and food waste along the safari trails. Sandeep admitted that getting too close had been a miscalculation and voluntarily suspended his tour services for a month following the event. Anton later spoke to local reporters, describing the bear as faster than I ever imagined, and calling his actions a stupid move driven by adrenaline and a camera lens. His story gained traction online, with wildlife safety forums using it as a cautionary tale. The photo he managed to snap just before the bear charged, blurred and tilted but capturing the moment the bear lifted its head, was published in a few nature magazines with the caption, "1 second before." Following the attack, the national park authorities enforced stricter regulations on how close vehicles could approach large wildlife. Sandeep eventually returned to guiding, but changed his practices. He reportedly became adamant about not bending the rules for a better view. As for Anton, he continued his travels, but shifted his focus to photographing animals from a safer distance, often through long lenses and from hides. He later joked that the scar on his shoulder was the closest thing he had to a tattoo, but he never returned to the national park in the Indian state of Karnataka. The Great Smoky Mountains stretch across the Tennessee-North Carolina border, a vast swath of ancient forest home to black bears, bobcats, elk, and countless species of birds and reptiles. Among the oldest mountain ranges in North America, the Smokies are known for their morning mists, rugged trails, and remote winding rivers. Rising tourism has brought thousands of hikers and campers each year in recent decades. Still, it also has a creeping problem: human food waste, which alters the behavior of wild animals, especially black bears. In late June 2009, a 42-year-old hobbyist fisherman named Lowell Bragg took a solo weekend trip deep into the Tennessee side of the Smokies. Lowell, originally from Paducah, Kentucky, was a machinist by trade, but an outdoorsman by habit. He preferred isolation, often fishing in places that required long hikes and minimal contact with other people. That weekend, he had targeted a stretch of the Middle Prong Little River, a relatively quiet tributary several miles from the nearest ranger station. Lowell's plan was straightforward: hike in with a day pack, fish through the afternoon, and return before dark. He signed in at the Tremont trailhead that morning, carrying only basic gear: a collapsible rod, a few protein bars, and a thermos of coffee. By noon, he had made it 2 miles in, settled near a bend in the river, and was thigh-deep in the cool, rushing water, casting for brook trout. According to what Lowell later told wildlife officers, everything seemed normal for the first few hours. He had caught and released 3 small trout and was enjoying the quiet when he heard something large moving through the woods behind him. At first, he assumed it was a deer, but the cracking of branches and low, rhythmic grunting soon ruled that out. Turning slowly, he spotted the black bear stepping out behind a boulder about 30 yards away. The bear, which Lowell estimated at around 200 pounds, wasn't charging or making aggressive movements. Instead, it paced back and forth with slow deliberation, eyes fixed on him. At the time, Lowell believed the scent of fish, or perhaps the lingering odor from an old campsite, had drawn the animal in. He raised his arms and yelled, clapping and making sharp noises. At first, it seemed to work. The bear paused, then dropped its head and sniffed the air. But instead of retreating, it started walking closer. Lowell backed toward the riverbank, grabbing his rod and a flat rock in one hand. When the bear reached about 15 feet from him, it let out a short, guttural growl and charged. The charge wasn't fast, but it was direct. Lowell tried to sidestep and swing the rod at the bear's face. The fiberglass rod shattered against its shoulder. The bear knocked him over in a single swipe, sprawling across the rocks. One claw tore through his jacket and gashed his upper back. He rolled onto his side, kicking out, while the bear loomed over him, sniffing and snorting. It batted at him once more, this time grazing his leg. What likely saved him was the bear's uncertainty. It didn't go for a fatal bite or sustained attack. It seemed agitated but unsure. Lowell grabbed a stick and jabbed at its snout, screaming with everything he had. After a tense standoff that couldn't have lasted more than 20 seconds but felt endless, the bear huffed, turned, and loped back into the forest. Lowell was bleeding and dizzy, but conscious. His first instinct was to move fast. With no cell service and no one else in sight, he crawled and limped the half-mile back to the main trail. At one point, he had to stop and wrap his hoodie around his bleeding leg to slow the flow. Once back on the path, he staggered another mile until he flagged down a pair of hikers who were startled to see a man covered in blood, waving them down with a stick. They helped walk him the final distance to the parking lot and called for an ambulance. Paramedics arrived within 30 minutes. He was transported to a hospital in Maryville, where he was treated for lacerations to his back and thigh, dehydration, and mild hypothermia. He stayed in recovery for 3 days and was released with a leg brace and a long list of medications. Wildlife officers launched an immediate search for the bear, based on tracks and a ranger's prior report of a bear in the area showing signs of food habituation. They believed it to be a juvenile male that had lost its fear of humans. The animal was never located. Officials put up new signage in the Tremont area warning visitors of recent bear activity and began rotating patrols along less frequented trails. Lowell's story received brief local coverage, but didn't make national news. He later joked that he should have gotten attacked by a cougar. It would have made for a better headline. But he wasn't bitter. He told reporters he didn't blame the bear, calling it just an animal following instincts. He admitted he'd gotten too comfortable hiking alone and swore off solo trips for good. The incident prompted the park to revise its fishing permit policies. Those heading deep into bear territory must carry bear spray and leave detailed itinerary information with rangers. Although some called the measures excessive, no further incidents were reported in that park section in the following 5 years. As for Lowell, he recovered fully and returned to fishing, always with a buddy, always near populated trails. He framed the broken half of the rod that snapped during the attack and hung it on his workshop wall with a small brass plate that read, June 2009. Didn't catch a thing worth keeping, but it kept him alive.